So opposing apartheid, opposing genocide now is a constant theme of Iran's foreign policy for the last 45 years. And there's a consensus in the country that instead of accepting American promises of sanctions relief, Iran should be helping the Palestinians and the Lebanese in their resistance. You cannot live in a neighborhood with a genocidal regime nearby. So sooner or later they will come after you. And in the last 45 years, American officials have been telling Iran that if you stop your support of the Palestinian cause, all of the sanctions would go away. Western corporate media outlets like to call these organizations Iran's proxies. You probably have heard that terminology. But they are not proxies. These are independent organizations that Iran helps, but they make their own decisions. They help each other. That if democracy is good, because they say democracy is good. If it's good, practice it. Practice it in Palestine. Democrats, in fact, are more capable of creating an international consensus against Iran. Trump has difficulty creating consensus within his own country. Republicans are more hawkish on military confrontations.
Hello and welcome to another episode of India and Global Left. If you're new to our show, please smash that subscribe button. In any case, do watch our video and hit like and share. Without further ado, let me welcome our guest today, Professor Foad Izadi. Professor Izadi is an Iranian professor at the University of Tehran, and today we are going to discuss the situation in the Middle East. Professor Izadi, welcome to India and Global Left.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation.
We want to start with the recent escalation in Lebanon by the Zionist regime of Israel. There are reports by the Financial Times which says that 31,000 buildings, 1,336 people, 31,000 buildings are destroyed, 1,336 people are killed, and 1 million people are displaced since the escalation of the bombing campaign in Lebanon on September 20. We have also seen the Iranian response 2 days ago, which was firing of about 20 to 200 missiles. Can you tell us a little bit about the objective of that Iranian response and what's the current situation in terms of the relationship between Israel and Iran?
Under international law, if a country is attacked, the right to respond is legitimate. And we had a presidential inauguration in July. The head of political bureau of Hamas, the Palestinian bureau, Palestinian leader, Dr. Ismail Haniyeh, was in Tehran as an official guest of the state. Mr. Haniyeh used to be a prime minister of Palestine. When they had elections, his party, Hamas, won the elections, and he became the prime minister in Palestine. As a former prime minister, as the leader of the political bureau of Hamas, he was a state guest. And the Israelis assassinated him in the middle of the night in the place that he was resting. This is an attack on this individual. It's also an attack towards Iran. As you might have heard, Iran's president mentioned this a few days ago, that the United States and Europeans asked Iran not to respond given the fact that Iran had the right to respond, saying that there was a ceasefire, a deal near, and they wanted Iran to refrain from responding. And the Pezeshkian government is a new government. He's just inaugurated. He has made promises on economic policies. He really doesn't want to have a military confrontation with Israel or United States or any other country. So Iranian government refrained from responding. This was in July, waiting for some ceasefire to happen. And then, as you mentioned, Israelis and Americans decided to expand the war. A couple of weeks ago, they started attacking Lebanon. I think the death toll is about 2,000 now, a million people displaced. Then they started assassinating Hezbollah leaders, including Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah, the Secretary General of Hezbollah. And of course, they have been continuing their genocide in Gaza, killing about 42,000 people so far. And I think all these factors, plus a very heavy public opinion pressure on the government to do something, resulted in Iran responding with ballistic missiles. Iranian military officials said that 90% of the missiles hit their targets. Washington Post today reported that 20 missiles reached 3 Israeli military bases, which is significant. The ballistic missiles are, heavy-duty missiles that can do serious damage. So this was the reason for Tuesday night response to the Israelis. And today, the country's leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, mentioned that if Israelis attack Iran, Iran will repeat a response to Israeli attack. Other Iranian officials, including president, have said the same thing, saying that the next response, Iranian response, is going to be stronger than what we have seen so far. There was the first time Iranians sent ballistic missiles to Israel was in April, after Israelis attacked Iranian embassy in Damascus and killed a number of individuals. The hope of the Iranian government was that that first attack would send a message to Israel not to attack Iran. Obviously, the Israelis didn't get the message last time. The hope in Tehran is that they get the message this time.
Can you talk a little bit about the public mood in Tehran and Iran in general? We have recently had multiple reports that Benjamin Netanyahu's personal popularity was slowly sinking for the last 1 year, but his recent attacks on Yemen, in Syria, in Lebanon, and escalation of war and destruction and genocide, both in Gaza but also in West Bank, has led to great jubilation in Israeli public. Gideon Levy told Democracy Now! About sweets being distributed by Israeli media after they escalated the war and killed the leadership of Hezbollah. What's the public mood and sentiment after the Israeli response that we have seen recently?
If you have engaged in a genocide for about a year and you start a new war, the hope that we have is that the people who voted for Mr. Netanyahu realize that he's doing this for his personal interests. He would go to jail if the war stops today because of the violation of Israeli law. So he wants to continue the war for personal interest. He's a war criminal. Unfortunately, the people who are cheering him are associates of war crimes. It's not a good sign. This is not a good sign. In Iran, Iran's response was legal under international law. Iran was attacked first. And as I said, there was a lot of public opinion pressure for the government to do something. So once that happened, I don't know if you have seen the pictures, but Iranians, millions of them, came to the streets celebrating. We had some pictures of Iranians getting gas, and in the corporate media in the West, that became the news that Iranians are getting gas. So I did an interview a couple of nights ago. This anchor asked me about Iranians getting gas, and he said that when you show that and you don't show the celebrations, then this is one-sided. And sometimes I make jokes. I said they're getting gas to go and join the celebrations. So the pictures are available on Iranian media outlets. Press TV is an English outlet. The videos are available. It was, this becomes an issue of national pride. Iran is an ancient country like India, and you don't just attack an independent country in that manner. The Israelis are in a rampage, and the Iranians hope that they don't engage Iran and stop the genocide in Gaza and stop the aggression against Lebanon.
Iranian officials have recently said that our response is very precisely directed at military installations and to stop some of the bombing campaigns in Lebanon, as opposed to Israeli strategy, in fact, of killing civilians. Could you briefly comment on that?
This was another question that I was asked in the last few nights, that people are saying that we don't see any damage in Tel Aviv. And the answer that I had was that Mr. Netanyahu is not a role model for Iranian leaders. Iranian leaders are not in the business of killing babies on a daily basis. They targeted military sites, Mossad, the Israeli intelligence headquarters, and they don't allow cameras. Israelis don't allow cameras in those sites for people to see the damage. I saw a satellite picture in the morning. I've been out all day, so I don't know if there are more satellite pictures or not. But there was a satellite picture in the morning showing the damage at one of the military sites, and Washington Post reported that the damage at 3 sites. Al Jazeera reported that Israelis are trying to recover from the damage that they received. So, Iranian leaders have ethical standards. They follow international law when it comes to warfare. And that's something that's missing among the Israeli leaders.
You have mentioned about Iranian government's policy to open up to the West. The US sanctions in particular is really crippling for any economy. We have seen this for multiple countries, and there are reports about Iranian government wanting to open up to the US. I wanted to ask you how much Israel has been an impediment to US-Iran relationship, and where does the Iran-US relationship stand at this moment?
In the last 45 years since the 1979 revolution, Iranian government policy has not been to have a military confrontation with US or have hostilities towards US. Americans didn't like the fact that the revolution kicked out an American puppet, the Shah, I understand in India, Shah is a famous name. It probably comes from Iran. It's a Farsi word, Persian word. uh, that Shah that we kicked out had nothing to do with the last name Shah. It was a brutal dictator that was oppressing the people and plundering the resources, and was a puppet of Western governments. The Americans didn't like that. They started sanctions and pressures on Iran, and Israelis have been a constant force to increase sanctions and pressures on Iran. So in the last 45 years, whenever some US government administration wanted to reduce sanctions or improve relations or lower tensions, it was the Israeli lobby, especially the AIPAC, that worked with the people in the Congress. Congress is an Israeli occupied territory. They have a lot of power there to introduce bills to prevent. And in the last 45 years, American officials have been telling Iran that if you stop your support of the Palestinian cause, all of the sanctions would go away. And the Iranian leaders have not accepted that. One reason was mentioned by Ayatollah Khamenei today in a speech. He said that if Israelis can get away with occupation in Palestine and killing of Palestinians, then they would move to other countries. And we already saw that. They are moving towards Lebanon. If they manage to do the same thing in Lebanon as they did in Palestine, the assessment here, at least among Iranian leaders, is that Iran may be next. So these promises of normal relations in exchange for support for the Palestinian cause, it is not accepted by Iran. One reason is that this was a revolution, and revolutionaries realized that they need to help the oppressed internationally. There is this sense of association, and this is not just for Palestine. Countries like Venezuela, people who are not Muslim, people who are very far away from Iran. Iran has been helping Venezuela for many years now. I went to Venezuela. I've been to Venezuela 4 or 5 times. One time, I was in a Venezuelan plane that was totally empty. We had the pilot, the co-pilot, and me, a couple of other crew members. And the reason is that for some years now, Venezuela sends its American-made commercial airliners to Iran to be fixed. Because of US sanctions on Venezuela, Boeing is not servicing Venezuelan airplanes, and Iran has been sanctioned longer than Venezuela is. So Iran knows how to deal with sanctions because of that fact. So I was joking with my friends that this is a newly fixed plane, and we were joking that we don't know if it was fixed properly or not, because we were the first people on the plane. The same reason Iran supports Venezuela, for the same reason that Iran stopped selling oil to apartheid South Africa in 1979 when the revolution happened. One of the first things that Iran did was to stop selling oil to South Africa and Israel at the same time, I think on the same day. South Africans mostly are not Muslims. Muslim population, there is a tiny minority. So opposing apartheid, opposing genocide now is a constant theme of Iran's foreign policy for the last 45 years. And there's a consensus in the country that instead of accepting American promises of sanctions relief, Iran should be helping the Palestinians and the Lebanese in their resistance. You cannot live in a neighborhood with a genocidal regime nearby. So sooner or later, they will come after you. So it's better to make sure that genocidal policies are not successful. This creates pressure on the government and the people. Normally the lower segments of society are affected more by sanctions, and people's tolerance is not the same. Some people get tired of sanctions. In recent years, we have had riots in Iran. Tiny minority of people, but still, they get a lot of Western news coverage. But there is a segment of society that's, is tired of sanctions. So it creates problems for the country. But I don't think Iran's policy of supporting the resistance front is going to end. Partly because of ideological reasons, and partly because it's actually in the national interest of Iran to make sure that Israelis don't achieve their foreign policy goals. And this is what all countries should be doing. It shouldn't be just Iran seriously opposing genocide. It should be, other countries should be doing that as well. That's also international law. We have a UN General Assembly resolution specifically saying that if there is a genocide somewhere, other countries should not be watching. They should be stopping that genocide. So overall, Iran, United States relations are at its poorest status for many years. Netanyahu may want to get the United States to attack Iran militarily. He would like to see American soldiers fighting his wars. But Iran, as I said, has been careful not to play in that scenario. Iran doesn't want to be fighting the United States, especially the current government in Iran. They want to focus on the economy, find a way of going around sanctions and stuff like that, economic issues. And Iran's constitution, if you read it, and I hope you do, if you read Iran's constitution, it's available online, you would think Iran is a socialist country because of all the government obligations to provide welfare services to the people. So in Iran, education is free in first grade to 12th grade, totally free. At university level, half of university students pay zero. The people who score higher in exams, entrance exams, the other half pay a minimal tuition. Healthcare, Iran's median age in 1979 when the revolution happened was 55. Now it's 77. So you have an increase of 22 years in Iranians living longer, and that means better healthcare, but more medicine, higher education. When you look at the Human Development Index, this is a UN index, Human Development Index. In terms of growth, Iran is number one all over the world in terms of growth, because during Shah's time, the situation of the country was very bad, although the country was very rich in terms of oil and gas. And in the last 45 years, there's a huge improvement in people's lives. So Iran is number one in terms of growth at Human Development Index, if you count the last 40 years. So overall, the country is under pressure. The country is advancing. The missiles that Iran use are indigenously built. unlike the Israeli missiles that come from the United States, mostly these are indigenous technology, Iranian engineers. So overall, I think although Iran does not want to have a military confrontation or a war, I think Iranian leaders have decided that they may need to defend themselves in that manner, in the manner of military response, and they're able to do that because of what we have seen in the last 45 years.
There is so much of my personal interest and interest of the platform that you spoke, but just in the interest of time and the agenda of this program, I'll stick to geopolitics and foreign relations. It was very interesting when you said that when you mentioned the responsibility of Iranian revolution to stand with the Palestinian resistance movement, because that was the core of Arab nationalism, and Iran is not even an Arab state. So if you could tell us a little bit about Iran becoming this big supporter of what is often called as the axis of resistance, but there is also a huge link with Arab nationalism. And also, how do you look at the process that, in my view, started with Camp David agreement with the so-called normalization of Egypt and Israel, but has continued throughout and now is culminating, in a sense, in what is often talked as Abraham Accords, which is normalizing Israel. I'm so sorry. Normalizing Israel's relationship with the Gulf monarchs or the dictatorships under the tutelage of the US, all geared against Iran. So can you tell us a little bit about these processes that are kind of evolving in the Middle East?
The revolution happened in 1979, and in 1982, Israelis attacked Lebanon. At that time, there was no such thing as Hezbollah. Hezbollah was created after the 1982 invasion of Lebanon by Lebanese people, more or less your age, younger Lebanese that wanted to free their land from an occupying force. And 3 years later, in 1985, that resistance started. This is how Iran's foreign policy works. That people ask, since this is an established government, people all around the world basically ask for help when they're trying to achieve a goal that Iranian government thinks is worth supporting. So if young Lebanese want to free the land from Israeli occupation, in 1985, Iranian government decided to support that initiative. And this is how Hezbollah was established, and this is how they managed to force Israelis out in 15 years. So they started in 1985, they pushed Israelis out in 2000. With regard to Iraq, for example, you had ISIS that was taking over the country. So Iran established, responded to the wishes of established militias for help. It was not a good idea for Iraq or Syria to be taken over by ISIS. ISIS terrorists claim to be Muslims, but they really don't follow Islamic teachings. Islam doesn't teach you to engage in terrorism. And with the help of Iran, these organizations in Iraq, in Arabic they call it Hashd al-Shabi, they managed to push ISIS out. In Yemen, the the Saudi government decided to do to Yemen what Israelis are doing to Gaza. The difference is that Yemen is a bigger country. Bombing Yemen resulted in tens of thousands of people getting killed. In that case, the Yemenis asked Iran for help, and Iran did help. Western corporate media outlets like to call these organizations Iran's proxies. You probably have heard that terminology. But they are not proxies. These are independent organizations that Iran helps, but they make their own decisions. They help each other. They are both Shia and Sunni. Hamas is a Sunni organization. Palestinians are Sunnis. Lebanese are Sunnis and Shias. So it's not a Shia or Sunni agenda. It's an agenda to help these organizations to be able to basically kick United States out of the Middle East. Mm-hmm. Because this is one of the things that Iran's leader said today in his speech, that as long as you have Americans in this part of the world, in our part of the world, you are not going to see peace. It's enough. United States can be a superpower, but not in this part of the world. We can play superpower elsewhere. Hopefully, they realize that the era of superpowers are over. They need to look at ways of, managing their own country and engage in a soft landing. You realize that you're in decline and you manage it properly. The other option is a hard landing, and based on what American politicians do in foreign policy, you generally think that they're choosing the second choice. They're moving towards a hard landing by supporting genocide, for example, in Palestine. So this is what Iran did. What the other side was planning to do was to get these US client states in this part of the world to accept occupation of Palestine, to normalize relations with Israel, and some of them did. Saudis, I think, were next in line, and you had the operation of Palestinians last year. They called it the Abraham Accords. And the Abraham Accords' aim was to have petrodollars provided to Israelis leading these Arab countries to fight Iran. That was the basic idea behind Abraham Accords. So that process is not going fast because it would be a suicidal choice for new Arab countries to normalize relations with Israelis now. Israelis are in a rampage. They're not, if they had accepted the two-state solution, none of these things would have happened. If they had accepted the UN resolution for a ceasefire, none of these things in Lebanon would have happened. But they're on a rampage. What Iran has been saying for many decades now is that we need a one-state solution in Palestine, meaning that people who live there, whether they're Jews or Muslims or Christians or whatever ethnicity they have, religion they have, one man, one vote. This is what happened in South Africa. South Africa ended its apartheid after the indigenous people could vote. They did not elect the white racist as their leader. They chose Nelson Mandela because they had the right to vote. We need to give the Palestinians the same right to vote. And if that happens, then Netanyahu is not going to be elected as prime minister once everybody has the right to vote. The reason Netanyahu is the prime minister is because Palestinians in that historic Palestine don't have the right to vote. So that is the real solution. Iran does not want to kick the Jews out of Palestine. They can stay if they want to, but you know, as it happened in South Africa, you need to make sure that justice is served, and the new government, whatever government comes out of that political process, would decide what to do next. So we always tell these Western colleagues that if democracy is good, because they say democracy is good, if it's good, practice it in Palestine. So the Abraham Accords are going nowhere fast. It would be embarrassing for any Arab leaders to recognize. But I don't think the Americans have given up, especially if Trump becomes president in November. Then this is his project. So they may follow through with that process again. But I think it's going to be much more difficult after the genocide that we have experienced in that country.
The US election is upcoming, and there are many debates from within. But I wanted to ask you, just from Iranian perspective, we have seen the history of some steps towards normalization during the Obama years, many of which were overturned by Trump. Does it make any difference to Iran whether Donald Trump comes back to power or whether the Democratic Party continues to be in power?
You know, Biden was supposed to return to the nuclear agreement when he became president. He criticized Trump for leaving the agreement. Trump left 18 agreements during his tenure, and Biden returned to 17, with the exception of the nuclear agreement with Iran. And he could return to all 18. The reason he didn't do it was because of the Israeli lobby. You know, the Israeli lobby is influential both in Republican and Democratic parties. And I don't know if you remember, but when Biden came into office, they were saying that we wanted longer and stronger. This is the actual English word they use, longer and stronger agreement. And Iranian government has started negotiating, and it got nowhere. And I think a lot of people here realize that the problem is really not Iran's nuclear program or other excuses they have against Iran. You know, in recent years, they are worried about the rights of Iranian women. You know, if you're really worried about the rights of Iranian women, you wouldn't be sanctioning them so heavily. You know, I teach at the University of Tehran. 55% of our students at the University of Tehran are female. And you know, the first year we had the PhD program at our college, we took 5 students. All of them were female. Not because we wanted to have all 5 female, but you know, as you know, girls are generally smarter than boys. They did better in their exams.
Sorry for the interruption. Iranian universities also have a large share of female professors.
That's true. That's true. In some Muslim countries, they are, you know, females face difficulties with regard to education and other things, but that's not Iran. Iran is not like that. So because of this pressure on Iran, the new generation of Iranians are becoming as much anti-American as their fathers, because you know the revolution happened 45 years ago. So we have young people that have never seen Iran's situation during Shah's time, but they look at U.S. policies towards Iran. They look at different Iranian administrations that want to reduce tensions with the United States, and they realize the problem is under the side. and they're becoming anti-American. They have the right to do so because they don't see any change in anti-Iran policies coming out of Washington. So the United States is actually not serving its own interests when it comes to Iran. They're more or less serving Israeli interests when it comes to Iran. And many people here realize that whether you have a Republican administration or Democratic administration, the main problem they have is with the government. So it really makes no difference who's sitting at the White House, in the White House. Democrats, in fact, are more capable of creating an international consensus against Iran. Trump has difficulty creating consensus within his own country. Republicans are more hawkish on military confrontations. So each candidate has its his or her own characteristics. But one thing they agree is that they need to continue their anti-Iran policies, and Iranians are, used to that. So, there's this culture of resistance, and you develop that culture of resistance. You get used to pressures, and you try to advance. One reason we have a thriving scientific community, engineering community, is because of sanctions, because people have to make things internally, and in a way that is helping Iran advancing scientifically. It's the easiest thing to do is just pay some Western company to ship you whatever technology you want, but you're not going to learn anything. So I think, and Iran could be an example for others, that you could resist and thrive at the same time. You don't have to follow dictates from Washington. You can oppose US foreign policy, and you can advance, and you can help others advance. And I think that's the choice that Iranian leaders have decided to have.
In this Iranian spirit of multilateralism, my next question is going a little bit beyond the axis of resistance and ask you about Iran's relationship with other nations, including the BRICS nations. Iran is Russia's neighbor and has had a very long and deep relationship. Its relationship with China is deepening very rapidly, with China buying most of its Iran's oil. Iran and India has had a very long and deep relationship, even with a very anti-Muslim Hindu nationalist sentiment in India. There is generally a culture of pro-Iran sentiment in India. Can you talk a little bit about Iran's relationship with the rest of the world, particularly Russia and China?
Iran joined the BRICS countries last year. Everybody was happy here. I think we are moving towards a multipolar world. And, in the previous world, Iran didn't had difficulties because it was dominated by Western powers. And Western powers don't like Iran because of what Iran did to them, cutting their interest in this country. As you said, Iran's relations with India is good. But let me be honest, sometimes we in Iran are worried about the Muslim minority in India. And I don't think having pressure on Muslim minority is good for India. That creates a bad image in the Muslim world. There are 2 billion Muslims internationally, and given India's history of anti-colonialism, given India's history of during the non-aligned movement. Given India's advances in economy and science and technology, given the fact that India and the Muslim world are right next to each other, it's not good for either India or China or Russia to be confronting. This is what the Americans want. They want to have a clash of civilizations. Indian Hindus fighting Indian Muslims, and both in China and Russia, there are substantial Muslim communities. They want to use these communities to cause difficulties for both Russia and China. And it's not good for the Muslims. It's not good for these new powers to have this level of confrontation. Uniting against imperialism, uniting against Western aggression, should be the objective of the people in the South, no matter what religion they have. So this old policy of divide and conquer should not be working in 21st century. Iran's relations with China and Russia are both good. We're having this BRICS summit in a few days in Russia. So Iran's president is going there. They're signing a 20-year agreement with Russia in this trip next week. Iran signed a 25-year agreement with China a couple of years ago. Chinese realize that they get a good portion of their energy from the Persian Gulf, and they realize that the Arab states in the Persian Gulf are under pressure from the United States, and since these kingdoms are more vulnerable to U.S. pressure, they may have to, because of the request from Washington, to reduce their relations with China if there is a confrontation between China and United States in the future. The only country that is independent and is not under is not a U.S. client state is Iran. And Iran's vast oil and gas reserves in Iran is number one in terms of oil and gas combination. That could help China. I hope, there are difficulties between China and India relations. I hope these difficulties go away, because these two Asian countries, if they work together, I think it's going to be good for them both economically and politically. I think we need to have a Asian NATO. Palestine is in Asia; it's in the Asian continent. If we had an Asian NATO, then you don't need the United States or other powers to come and interfere in Asian affairs. Since we don't have an Asian NATO, then Westerners feel free to come in any place in this continent. So overall, I think both with China and Russia and India, relations are improving. We have that Chopper port that India and Iran are jointly working on in the Persian Gulf. That's an Iranian port, Chabahar port. I hope relations with India and Pakistan would improve. Mm-hmm. Again, Asian countries don't need to be having confrontations, and creating a front against Western hegemony, American hegemony, is important both among governments and among individuals. So intellectuals, university academics, others joining hand against 500 years of Western colonialism. And if these people are divided, don't know each other, don't work with each other, then they're going to be under difficulties. If Americans can get away with what they're doing with Iran, then India could be next, because if they could do that to Iran, if India becomes more independent or doesn't want to follow whatever demand the US has, then India becomes another China, another Russia. Generally, Americans don't like big, powerful states in this part of the world. And sooner or later, difficulties arise. So overall, I think we need to have more unity, and it's possible. Asians generally are, uh, they don't have this history of colonialism, and they can work with each other in a normal way and end that era of colonialism for good.
On that optimistic note of ending the era of colonialism, um, Professor Foad Izadi, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you for having me. Take care.
Hi, my name is Ayushman. I, along with Jyotisman, have started this platform. In the last 2 years, we have tried to build content for the left and progressive forces. We have interviewed economists, historians, political commentators, and activists so far. If you have liked our content so far and want us to build an archive for the left, I have two requests for you. Please do consider donating for the cause. Link is in the description below. Also, if you are not able to do so, don't feel sad. You can always like our videos and share our videos to your comrades. Finally, don't forget to hit the subscribe button.
And in the last 45 years, American officials have been telling Iran that if you stop your support of the Palestinian cause, all of the sanctions would go away.